Bone Tomahawk, a fan novelization by Jeremy Terry, based on the screenplay by S. Craig Zoller, read by the author. Chapter 3, The Nurse. Arthur O'Dwyer lay in bed with his wounded leg propped up on a pillow as his wife strode in carrying a steaming bowl of hot water and clean rags in her petite hands. She took in the state of her husband and frowned down her slender nose at him. It should be elevated higher than your heart. Arthur looked about at the decorative pillows he was surrounded by. Is this why you buy so many pillows? Samantha set the bowl down on the nightstand beside the bed and slid 2 more pillows beneath his leg. I buy pillows because they're pretty. This isn't very comfortable, Arthur commented. It isn't supposed to be, she replied with a shrug. So it's correct, he said. Samantha ignored this as she gently lifted his long john leg up to reveal his swollen and splinted calf. 3 lines of stitches ran up toward the knee, their edges purple and angry looking. Arthur couldn't help flinching as the memory of his fall from the roof invaded his mind. How he'd screamed as he lay in the dirt, staring at the shattered ends of bone sticking through his ruptured flesh. How's it look? He asked. The same, she answered, lifting one of the rags from the steaming bowl and wringing water from it. He watched her with trepidation as she carefully folded the cloth into a square and then doused it with an antiseptic from a small brown bottle. She placed the cloth on the wound, sending fire lancing up his leg. He clenched his teeth but did not make a sound. 5 seconds passed, and with them the worst of the pain. Once the hellish burning stops, he said, leaning back against the headboard, it feels almost nice. Thanks. You were very welcome, Samantha said. Arthur touched her hand as she sat down on the bed beside him. You're taking real good care of me. Is there anything I can do for you? She hesitated for a moment and then reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a folded paper. Would you read this out loud? It's the poem that you wrote for me when you were in Wyoming. Arthur felt his cheeks burn, and he glanced down at his hands. It ain't a poem. Just some things I was thinking and some emotions I was feeling. Would you read it to me? His face burned hotter still. He knew he must be as red as the quilt he lay under. It'll sound stupid if I say it out loud. Samantha put her hand on his cheek and forced him to look at her. It will not. It's beautiful. Whenever I felt lonely, I read it and felt better. Please? He stared back into the eyes, the color of the October sky over Montana, and felt his heart skip a beat. She was truly more lovely than anything he had seen during his long months on the plains. He cleared his throat. I can't think of a polite way out of this. That's because there isn't, she smirked, laying the paper on his lap. He reached for the letter, but stopped when someone knocked on the front door. He glanced up to her. What time is it? 10:30, she replied. The knock came again, polite but insistent. Arthur tried to get up, and Samantha gently pushed him back down. Stay, I'll see. Mr. and Mrs. O'Dwyer, called a voice from outside. It's John Bruder. I'm here regarding medical matter. Arthur relaxed as his wife stood and called out. Just a moment, Mr. Bruder. I will be there presently. She walked to the wardrobe against the wall and donned a long black overcoat from inside before walking from the room and opening the front door. Bruder doffed his hat to her, a smirk on his handsome face. Good evening, Mrs. O'Dwyer. She took in his immaculate appearance. Are you hurt? Bruder shook his head, a chaste expression replacing his smile. I'm not the injured party. There was a drifter in the Learned Goat who got quick with the sheriff. Shot in the leg? Samantha asked, a pinched expression on her face. Shot in the leg, Bruder confirmed. She sighed. Doc Taylor is in his cups? Bruder raised a leather bag for her to see. Deep in his cups. I took his equipment. I will not need those, she responded with a shake of her head. I have my own. Ah, yes, Bruder said, opening the bag to reveal 2 unmarked glass bottles in amongst the various tools. But does yours contain 2 bottles of vodka? Samantha studied this with a jaundiced gaze and then turned away. Where is the drifter? In the jail, Bruder said, securing the bag. Samantha walked across the living room and took a pair of socks and gray boots from a cabinet set in one corner. She sat on a stool and slipped them on while Bruder waited patiently. Arthur, she called as she finished and strode to grab her medical bag from a shelf by the kitchen door. Yeah, he called from the bedroom. I need to extract a bullet. Mr. Bruder will escort me. Okay, Arthur said. John. Yes, Bruder answered. If you make any flirtatious remarks in my wife's presence, there'll be a reckoning. Bruder put a finger to the brim of his hat in a little salute. I'll behave, cowboy. Arthur listened as the door closed and two sets of boots crunched gravel across the dooryard and faded into the dark. He looked to the window and then reached to remove two of the pillows from under his leg. Arthur, Samantha called from outside. He froze. Yes, dear. Please keep your leg elevated. He put his hands back on his chest, chagrined. She knew him well. I will do it. See that you do, she called. Bye. Bye, he shouted back. He leaned back against the headboard once more, listening to the quiet night around his home and wishing that he could walk beside her as he once had. A fire crackled in the stove in the jail, warming Chicory and young Deputy Nick as they sat at a table playing a game of checkers. Hunt sat at his desk going through the contents of the stranger's exhumed saddlebag. He pulled a tarnished revolver from inside and studied a dried brown blotch of what he was afraid was blood that marred the barrel. Behind him, the stranger lay on the bunk in the jail cell, his feet and hands secured with manacles. Bad business, he thought. This man has done bad things to good people. Nick took one of his checkers in his fingers and jumped three of Chicory's red pieces in a row before removing them from the board. Chicory studied this for a moment, his bearded chin in hand. You have a gift. The younger deputy shook his head, stacking the pieces beside him on the table. I have 4 brothers and grew up in cold weather. All we did was play checkers. The oldster glanced up at the sheriff. You ever beat Nick in a checkers match? Hunt put the pistol back in the purloined bag. No, though we only played twice. Chicory scratched his chin, studying the board. I haven't had a different result in 100 games. Maybe I shouldn't bet on this. Perhaps not, Hunt said, trailing off as he spotted something else inside the bag and pulled it out. He held it up, turning it this way and that in the lantern light. What's that? Chicory asked. A blonde hair, Hunt said sadly as he pulled a wax envelope with the word evidence printed on it and dropped the hair inside. Looks like it was from a woman. Chicory slapped his thigh. I told you that his manner was suspicious. Someone knocked on the door, and the 3 men turned to look. That you, Doc? Hunt called. It's John Bruder, came the reply. I brought Mrs. O'Dwyer. Nick and Hunt stood up as Chicory stepped to the door and threw the bolt, unlocking it. He opened it, revealing Bruder and the lovely lady standing shoulder to shoulder, Samantha with her medical bag in hand and a grim expression on her face. The 3 lawmen inclined their heads in greeting. Thanks for coming, Hunt said, motioning for her to enter before turning back to the dandy. You are free to go. You are welcome, Bruder said with a smile. He took the time to light a fresh cigar before strolling off down the street towards his home. Hunt watched him go and then closed the door. He turned to Nick. Fling the gate. Nick took another of the older deputy's checker pieces and then grabbed a large set of keys that hung on a hook near the stove. He fumbled through them, found the one he wanted, and opened the cell to let Samantha and the others in. She stepped just inside the door and examined the trussed brigand laying on the straw-filled mattress. What do you need from us? Hunt asked from where he stood beside the desk. Samantha considered. An additional lantern and a pot of boiling water. I'll get it, Chicory volunteered, hustling off to get it for her. She looked over her shoulder at the sheriff. Can you remove his chains? No, ma'am, Hunt said with a single shake of his head. Samantha raised an incredulous brow. Look at the state of the man. Is he really that dangerous? In answer, Hunt placed his hand on the saddlebag laying on his desk. He buried this outside town. It isn't his, and everything inside has bloodstains on it. Samantha murmured noncommittally and walked over to sit down on the narrow bunk beside the man. He was shivering, and yet his clothes seemed soaked through with sweat. She rolled her sleeve up and placed the inside of her wrist on his damp forehead. "He's boiling with fever." Hunt lifted his hands. "I only shot him in the leg." "That's his hobby," Nick sniggered from his place by the stove. Hunt turned angry eyes on the young deputy, who cowed before his elder supervisor. "Not every man who leaps in front of your pistol is hell," Samantha said, ignoring the aside. Hunt turned his gaze back to the injured man and shrugged. "Do what you can for him. Very likely he's going to get hanged, but it'd be nice if the families of the people he bushwhacked could come to town and see him go purple on the rope." "That should inspire her," Nick muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Deputy!" Hunt warned, as Chicory came back in with a cast iron pot and a lantern. He walked into the cell, placed the boiling pot of water to the side of the cot, and hung the lantern on a small hook in the wall directly over the vagabond's head. "Stay here," Hunt said, pointing to Nick. "Help Mrs. O'Dwyer with whatever she needs. Lock up everything and escort her back home when she's done." "Hey, wait a second," Nick whined. "Isn't this why we have a backup deputy?" Chicory nodded. "I'll take care of things, Sheriff. I don't sleep more than a few hours a night anyways." "No," Hunt said, staring daggers at the young man. "Nick stays. I want you to get some rest, old man. You had a lot of activity today." "Yes, sir," Chicory said with an apologetic glance at the other deputy. Hunt put a hand on Chicory's shoulder. "You did real good today." Chicory beamed, sticking his chest out with pride as he exited the cell. Samantha watched him go and then opened her medical bag. She inclined her head towards the sleeping man and asked, "Does he have a name?" "He proffered the name Buddy, but that's probably the name of somebody he hates or who's dead," Hunt said. "Very well," Samantha nodded, pulling a mean set of calipers from the bag. "Please let my husband know not to wait up. I will need to stay and monitor the patient's fever after the surgery." "Yes, ma'am," Hunt said. He picked up his hat from his desk and placed it on his head. He stepped over to the ulster and nodded. It was time to depart. Chicory nodded back, picking up a book from his side of the desk before glancing back at the checkerboard with a smile. "Hey there," he said. "I'm doing better than I remembered. Much better." "You're looking at my side of the board," Nick said with a grin of his own. Chicory looked again. "Oh, that makes more sense. Too bad. You have a good night." "Night," Nick replied. He followed the other two men to the door and bolted it shut after they had left. He turned back and walked to the cell, sticking his fingers in the steaming water. "Seems hot enough." Samantha paused in the process of setting out her instruments on a clean towel. "Please don't put your fingers in the water." "Oh, yes, ma'am," Nick replied. From somewhere outside, an eerie whistle sounded and was answered by another on the far side of town. The vagabond, whose real name was Purvis, shuddered in his sleep as if he had heard and recognized the ominous sound. Chapter 4. Visitors. Arthur lay where Samantha had left him, obediently resting his leg on 3 pillows she'd placed beneath it. Sheriff Hunt stood in the doorway with his hat in hand, having just relayed Samantha's message to him. "Thanks for letting me know," Arthur said. Hunt nodded. "Thanks for loaning her out." Arthur sat up, unable to keep the worry from his face. "Deputy Nick's gonna see her back?" "He will," Hunt answered. Arthur sat back, satisfied that Bruder was out of the picture now. He looked up at the other man's bearded face. "How's your wife doing?" "Better," Hunt smiled. "We thought it was pneumonia, but it seems like it was just a bad cold." "Good to hear," Arthur said. "Give her my regards." "I surely will," Hunt replied, putting his hat back on. "You have a good night." "You too." The sheriff vanished from the doorway, and Arthur listened as his footsteps receded, leaving the house once again far too quiet. He glanced at the other side of the bed, feeling his wife's absence keenly. It was strange. He was not a man prone to fancy or worry, yet there was a lingering dread nagging at the back of his mind. His gaze fell on the letter he'd written to her months ago, the one she'd asked him to read to her. He picked it up and unfolded the parchment, clearing his throat. "Dear Samantha," he read, feeling foolish even though he was alone in the house. "I hope things are going good for you back in Bright Hope, and that Doc Taylor is drinking less. I will try to find some nice jewelry for you, even though you said not to spend money on that. I am in Wyoming now. The ride has been long and difficult, and the foreman had to discipline a lot of the men. He even had to let some go, which made things harder for the rest of us, especially in this cold weather. 2 weeks ago, I took charge of the night roundup and organized it better. Out here sometimes, when I look at the faces of the other cowboys, I know they are miserable all the way through, but since I met you, I don't get that feeling anymore like I used to. You give me this warmth in my direct center that won't turn cold no matter what happens out here. I am tired and have lost some weight, and I don't know if all of this makes clear sense, but to me it does. I saw these hills on the border, and the shapes of them reminded me of you when you were next to me in bed on your side. Sometimes I see you in waterfalls and clouds, and always you have that real happy look on your face like when I come back from being away and we are about to kiss for the first time in months." He trailed off, staring at the letter for a long moment. "That ain't a poem," he said, tossing the letter on the bedside table and extinguishing the lantern. Shadow invaded, and he closed his eyes, hoping to pass the lonely night as quickly as possible. The vagabond opened bloodshot eyes and stared up at Samantha as she twisted the small forceps and withdrew a flattened slug from his leg. Blood flowed freely, though not heavy enough to make her worry he might bleed out. She dropped the bullet into a small tin cup and then pressed the cloth bandage over the wound. The man flinched at the pressure, but did not try to squirm away. His stare seemed more pitiful than menacing to her. "My body feels like cotton," he said, slurring his words slightly. "That's because I gave you some tincture of opium," she said. She put the forceps down and reached into her bag, pulling out a small bottle of alcohol, more cloth rags, and needle and thread. "Are you done?" Nick asked from where he stood leaning against the cell's doorframe. He seemed more than eager to be off back to his warm bed. Samantha found she didn't much care for the man's demeanor or attitude. "I have to clean the wound and sew it shut," she answered as she carefully pushed thread through the eye of the needle and prepared to suture the vagabond's leg. Deputy Nick grimaced and checked the time on his gold pocket watch. Samantha almost asked him if she was inconveniencing him, but held her tongue in the end. There was no point in spurring on an argument. Better to see to the work at hand so that she could be away from the unpleasant situation and back home with her convalescing husband where she belonged. The injured man saw the needle and lay his head back on the lumpy mattress, closing his eyes. Samantha bent over him to begin as the sound of whinnying horses drifted through the window above the cot. 17-year-old Buford stepped from the small bunkhouse Mr. Wallington, his employer, let him stay in with the lantern held high. He stifled a yawn with his free hand as he crossed the yard towards the stable where several horses cried out in fear and agitation. Buford patted his overalls pocket, felt the comforting weight of the small skinning knife inside. It wasn't much, but it would be better than his empty hands should there be a coyote or some other critter in sight after his charges. "I'm coming, ladies," he called. "Don't you fret." He drew near the stable doors and paused, confused. The latch was open, and the sliding door stood ajar. No animal had done that. He slipped the knife from his pocket, listening for any sign of movement aside from the horse flesh inside, and thought he heard the rustle of strange footsteps on the hay-covered boards. He looked at the small knife and felt cold all over. Animals were one thing, people something else entirely. People that came to places they didn't belong to do things they ought not do, more often than not carried shooting irons with them. Still, he had a job to do, and he intended to go about it. He reached out and slid the stable door open another foot and stepped inside. Smells filled his nostrils, the sweet scent of the straw and oats the horses ate, and the scent of the animals themselves. All pleasant smells, but there was something else, something that should not be there, the scent of unwashed bodies and maggoty blood. He held his feeble lantern up to cast its glow as far as possible, and saw shifting shadows moving amongst the dark stalls. "Mr. Wellington?" he asked, his voice trembling with his fear. "Is that—" Something curved and white flashed out from the shadows, and he felt white-hot agony burn his throat. He looked down at the floor, saw a crude axe fashioned from the jawbone of a cow or a horse. Blood rained down his overalls and pattered on the boards at his feet. He tried to scream for help and heard only a gurgle of air escape his severed windpipe. He heard the twang of a bowstring, and then an arrow pierced his right eye. Hands grabbed him, and he was yanked forward deeper into the stable. He looked up with his remaining eye and saw monstrous shapes above him, their skin coated with the ashes of their fallen foes, their bodies adorned with the bones of both animal and victim. They raised bone tomahawks over their heads, and Buford closed his eye.
Okay, Slashaholics, this has been chapters 3 and 4 of Bone Tomahawk, the fan novelization by Jeremy Terry. I enjoyed these chapters, getting to know our characters a little more, and of course that last little bit there got a bit bloody. I gotta say, I've never seen this movie. I'm gonna have to check it out. But first, I'm gonna finish up listening to Jeremy's narration of this. That way it's kind of like I read the book before seeing the movie. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the story plays out. I enjoyed it. I hope all of you did. Please let Jeremy know what you thought of the chapters in the comment section below. If you would like to support the channel more, you can spread the word. That helps us the most. Clicking the like button, dropping a comment. Be sure to subscribe, click the bell for future notifications. And of course, if you want to go the extra mile, you can become a Patreon member, a channel member. You can even do one-time donations through PayPal, Cash App. You can order a cameo video, or even visit our merch store, or buy one of my books on Amazon. All the information is in the pinned comment and the description below. And until next time, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying thanks for listening, be excellent to each other, and remember, the sun never sets on those who ride into it. Stay sane inside insanity out there.